Hey, John, guess what?
What?
It's the future.
You ain't got no future, Jack.
No, that's not.
Egghart.
No.
Think about the future.
Wrong movie, John.
Hi, Doc. What's going on, huh? Where are we? When are we?
We're descending toward Hill Valley, California at 4:29 p.m. on Wednesday, October 21st, 2015.
2015? You mean we're in the future?
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Superheroes, Movies, and Superhero Movies. Today is October 21st, 2015, the day that Doc, Brown, and Marty and Jennifer go to, that's the date they go to.
Today. They go to today.
They go to today in Back to the Future Part 2, which back in 1989 when the movie was released was the future. And now that day is upon us, which is really kind of weird because that day seemed so far away when I was watching this movie as a kid in 1989/1990.
Right.
This movie was directed by Robert Zemeckis, written by Bob Gale from a story by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, starring Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, Thomas F. Wilson, not Crispin Glover, and Charles Fleischer, who I'll point out.
Billy Zane.
Billy Zane is got a little bit bigger role in this time around. He's got a couple of lines. I don't know. He might have had a line in the first movie, but yeah, it's nice to see those three guys back. Like I said, this movie was released in 1989. It was obviously this 4 years after the original Back to the Future, and but it takes place directly where that movie ends, right where that movie leaves off. This one picks up, if that makes sense. And this time, rather than heading back to 1955, which actually they do eventually, we're headed into the future. And so we couldn't not talk about this movie, seeing as how today is October 21st, 2015, the day they go to in the future. So figured in this episode, we'll talk like we always do about the movie, some nostalgia, and we'll also talk about what Back to the Future got right and what Back to the Future got wrong in 2015, which, spoiler alert, a lot.
Maybe. I mean, perhaps someone went and altered the timeline again.
This is an alternate 2015?
Yeah.
So we could have had flying cars and hoverboards?
We might have. Perhaps we were supposed to have flying cars, and you never know. I mean, that stuff. Of course, I have some I think plot holes in the storyline that we'll go over. Speaking of which, I am currently in the process of getting sick. My voice sounds actually a bit more radio-esque, I think. So maybe I should get sick more often.
So, John, did you see this film in the theater?
No.
What
year did it come out?
1989. Same year as Batman.
You saw it in the theater?
I sure did. I have a memory of seeing it in the theater, and I remember seeing the preview, because they shot this in Back to the Future Part 3 back-to-back. So I remember seeing that preview for Back to the Future 3 at the end of the movie and being just so excited about the next one. Like, there was more to the story,
Right,
Obviously,
and
there was
I
more
was
to the story,
watching this. I actually forgot about that part after the movie concludes. And first thing I noticed was the picture of Biff's distant relative,
Mad Dog
from the West. See, I've only seen Back to the Future Part 3, if that's what it's referred to as.
Yes.
I don't even know if I've seen it all the way through, to be honest.
What?
If I have, it's been once. I know that I've seen sections of it.
Right.
But I don't know if I actually finished it. It seems like it did. I can remember the ending, and I can remember the end, and I can remember parts in the middle. But
yeah.
But yeah, like, so seeing that picture, I was like, I wonder if they added that in there because they were already starting, work on ideas for the third movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the second instance where they're in the car going back to 1955, and you see the little mishap.
Right.
On the date, and it changes to 1885.
Yeah, has a little glitch.
I was like, I'm starting to think that they
They
are
knew what they were
alluding.
doing. Right.
And then there's one more. It seems like, the letter. Of course, the letter from
At the very end.
from Doc. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was like, oh yeah, they totally know where they're going with this.
Right. Yeah, they absolutely. I think I'm pretty sure they wrote part 2 and 3, together, and then they shot them.
Especially
back to
since
back.
they came out a year apart, and
Right,
they had
exactly.
footage to go. A lot of footage to go into the end of this movie.
Right.
So yeah,
Right. I remember that was like the first movie I can remember that did that. For me, I'm not sure if another movie had done that in the past, but to see a preview for part 3 just got me so excited. I could not wait to see the next installment as a kid. And I remember seeing part 3 a couple times in the theater. I have a story about that. If I didn't tell it already, I'll tell it in the part 3 episode. But this is another instance where my dad was not a huge fan of part 2. He just thought it was okay, but I think because he was a Western fan, he really, really enjoyed part 3. And so growing up, I always thought part 3 was the better one, and that's the one I saw more. I actually watched part 3 more than part 2. And it wasn't until I became an adult and I started hearing other people's opinions, and everybody else thinks part 3 is awful. And I was like, really? And everybody else really likes part 2. So then I, rewatching part 2 today, I've seen part 2 a bunch. But rewatching part 2 today, I really do enjoy part 2 a lot. I actually think it's really good, even though it does have some plot holes, which we can get into.
Uh-huh. That kind of reminds me of what you said about Batman and Robin.
Yeah.
People were like, that movie stinks. And you're
I'm
like, it's
like,
not that bad,
it's not
guys.
that bad.
Come on.
I know, and so I'm a little nervous about rewatching Back to the Future Part 3. I'm going to be like, oh, it is bad. But right now, as my memory stands, I still enjoy part 3. So I don't know which one I like better, part 2 or part 3. We'll have to decide for the part 3 episode whenever we do that.
I can remember, and it's been so long since I watched it, but I can remember from what I did see of part 3, I don't think I was liking it too much. And I love Westerns myself. In fact, I loved the clip that they showed Biff watching of Clint Eastwood.
Yeah,
I'm not sure which one it is, but it's one of the No Name movies.
Yeah, it's.
The Man
I
with
was
No
going to
Name.
ask you if it was Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
It's not that one.
So I think it's Fistful
one
of
of
Dollars.
the first 2.
Yeah, it's Fistful of Dollars. I'm pretty sure.
Right.
I'm almost positive when I watch Fistful of Dollars. that scene.
You have seen A Fistful of Dollars?
I have seen the first one. Yeah.
Nice. I've been trying to get Justin to watch The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly for over 10 years now. One of my favorite movies of all time. And
I'm ashamed that I haven't seen it.
I've been saying that for a long time, and then a long time ago, shortly afterwards, I saw a quote from Quentin Tarantino saying that it was his favorite film of all time, and I was like, okay, he really is a genius now. He understands good cinema. So if you haven't seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, you don't even need to see the first 2, which are A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More. You can watch The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly without seeing those movies, and don't think you have to like westerns, because you don't. It's just a good movie and fun, and it's long too. It's almost 3 hours, I think.
I think it is. I believe it is 3 hours, if not
more.
Yeah, if not longer.
But it's worth it. So, made in '69, I think. So it's a little dated, but it actually holds up way better than you'd think.
One day I'll. That's mainly that's the main reason why I haven't sat down and popped it in Good, Bad, and the Ugly, is just because of its running time.
It doesn't feel like that long at all. It's shocking.
I
feels
wish
like
that
a regular movie.
If a theater around here did a classic movie presentation, and they showed it in the theater, I'd definitely go see it. That's how I did. That's how I saw Dr. Zhivago, which If I can see it in the theater, then like I'll really enjoy it. But if I watch it at home, I'll end up pausing it or something, which is terrible, and it'll take me 3 days to finish. Yeah. So I'd much rather see it in the theater. But one day I will get around to watching it. I know you don't have to watch them in order, but I actually kind of want to watch for a few dollars more before I watch Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I know they're not really, other than, Clint Eastwood's no-name character, they're not really connected.
There is one connection that... See, I saw for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly first. Many times first. And then went back and... I didn't even know that it was a trilogy or that it was a sequel. So when I found out there were more, I went back and watched them. And there is a character in the second one, I think. I don't think he's in the first one. And he's in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And they don't reference anything to the previous movie, but I think there is that recognition that they have, but they never openly talk about it.
Is it the Lee Van Cleef character? Because I thought that he was playing a different character, but it was the same actor.
The guy with like...
Basically the bad from The Good, Bad, and the Ugly.
Right. Right, he's the bad. The Mexican dude is the ugly.
Played by Eli Wallach.
Right. So yeah, Lee Van Cleef, is that his name?
Yeah.
I think he's playing the same character, but I could be wrong.
Well, if I ever watch him, I'll let you know.
Because he looks the exact same, he has the same mustache. I think he even wears the same hat.
Right.
And stuff. But because of that, I think it's kind of cool. Because if he is playing the same character, it's like, that you can just kind of imagine what they're thinking, and the fact that they never even say look, it's you," but you can kind of see it in the way that they're looking and communicating. Mm-hmm. So that was always a theory of mine, though. Back to. I was
going to say, back to a movie that does have a lot of connections and recurring characters, Back to the Future Part 2. I read it somewhere that they had no intentions of having a sequel after Back to the Future. And if they had known that they were going to do a sequel, they wouldn't have put Jennifer in the DeLorean at the end of Back to the Future Part 1. Which is, pretty obvious, because as soon as they get to the future, they, essentially knock her out and put her off to the side.
Well, I mean, it's not that obvious because they do give her
she's important to the storyline. Because if they hadn't had to go get Jennifer, Biff couldn't have stolen the DeLorean.
True. Yeah. I was going to say though, she does get out and goes and sees, her future family. Mm-hmm. But it really doesn't affect anything at all. She just faints when she sees herself.
But that's what I love, though, is that there's that possibility that the universe will, fold in on itself.
Right.
Like Doc talks about. Creates a paradox, and everything as we know it will cease to exist, basically.
That's the worst case scenario, he says.
Right.
Otherwise, she'll just see herself and faint, which is what happened.
Let's talk about Hill Valley 2015, though. We can't just skip over this part. Okay. Marty and Doc show up in Hill Valley 2015, which is, basically just the Universal backlot. But it's the town square that we saw in Back to the Future Part 1, both in 1985 and 1955, because it's the clock tower, which apparently is still not working 60 years later.
Right.
And it's, now it's fancier. There's flying cars. We have everything is more expensive. That's actually one of my favorite parts is when Doc tells Marty to go get a Pepsi, and he gives him $50. He's like, "Here's $50. Get yourself a Pepsi." And then the Charles Fleischer, the guy I was talking about, he's the voice of Roger Rabbit, and I think Roger Rabbit came out in '88. So
I actually I actually saw Who Framed Roger Rabbit in the theaters.
Did you?
Yeah.
That one I did not get to see in the theater, but Charles Fleischer, the guy that comes up and he's like, "Save the clock tower," he goes, "Come on, throw a couple $100 in for the clock tower."
Right.
Like, money, the inflation is just insane in Back to the Future 2015. But that guy is the voice of Roger Rabbit.
That's crazy.
I'm guessing because, Robert Zemeckis did Roger Rabbit right before this movie, That's why, maybe he struck up a friendship with Charles Fleischer and threw him into this film. He's also the mechanic from 1955, the guy that's trying to charge Biff $300. It's the same character.
Okay.
So it's also the same actor.
Unless he found the DeLorean too.
So there's 3 1985s. Which one's the right one? Here's my question about, there's flying cars, obviously we don't have that. Hoverboards are still not in existence, unfortunately. Christmas of 1989, I asked Santa Claus for 2 things. I asked him for a Incredible Hulk action figure, which I did receive, and I asked him for shoes that lace themselves, which I did not receive, and I am still waiting on those shoes. So those shoes were a big part.
It's a pick one or the other, and he was like, I'll give you the Hulk.
I'll give you the Hulk figure. You can only ask for one thing, kid. Let's not get greedy here. I'm going to give you what you asked for first, which was the Hulk figure. No, I want the shoes. Those shoes, we had this conversation earlier today, John, about those shoes. You can buy those shoes now. They're kind of like, they don't have, you can buy them 2 different ways. You can buy them with the Nike logo or without the Nike logo. And without the Nike logo, they're obviously much cheaper. But with the Nike logo, especially the one where the Nike logo on the strap on front lights up, crazy amount of money those things go for. I sent you a link. The most expensive pair I found online were $20,000 for a pair of shoes.
Right, but if you watch Comic Book Man, you will know that it's not the highest price you see, because anyone can just throw a number up there. The question is, what was the highest price that they actually sold for?
Right. And I don't know how much the highest price paid for them it was, but I know that there's a bunch on eBay that one's the highest, and it's also the most professional looking post, I guess, on eBay. But there's a bunch of other ones that sell. There's one that's for $15,000. There's one for $8,000. So I don't know how much somebody is willing to pay for those shoes. But
well, I remember when those came out, the original ones that were done by Michael J. Fox's foundation,
right?
And they were not self-lacing, which apparently they have come out with them now. I believe.
Not that I know of, but that'd be pretty cool.
I think they did, or at least Nike said that they were going to be working on it for this year. But it's been a while since I've heard that.
Well, they only have 2 more months.
Yeah,
2.5.
No, they have today.
That's true. They have. Yeah,
they were supposed to.
The clock is ticking. You have only a few more hours. That's a good point. Yeah, so I'm, tempted to spend, not obviously thousands of dollars. I'm tempted to get the ones without the Nike logos, even though it won't have the Nike logo. But just because I've always wanted those shoes, ever since I was a kid.
I would wait for the Nike logo, man.
Well, it's not like they're going to come down in price. They've been out since, 2011 or something?
Yeah, but those were special. Those were a limited supply. You don't know if, of course, like I said, they would have done it this year if they were going to do it.
The self-lacing. Wait for the self-lacing.
No, I was going to say Nike coming out with just a mass production.
Oh, yeah.
Of it.
Of the Air Mags, I believe is what they were called. So anyway, moving on. Here's my question here's my first plot hole, I guess you could say. Biff learns that Doc Brown has made a time machine, and he conveniently is able to steal it and go back to 1955.
Right.
How does he know? I'm assuming he knows how to fly a car because he lives in 2015, and his car probably flies. But how does he know how to operate the time machine? How does he know about the time circuits, about the 88 miles per hour?
Right.
He shouldn't know any of that.
No. First of all, I assume that the time was just defaulted to
November 12th?
Because it was the last date used.
But it wasn't the last date used.
Besides...
Because Doc came back from the future and got Marty and Jennifer.
Right. But
there is a scene, there's a deleted scene with that Charles Fleischer character, I believe his name is Terry or Teddy or something like that, where he talks about November 12th, 1955 to Marty. And he says, I remember that day because this guy crashed his car into manure and he like wouldn't pay me the $300 he owes me or something like that. And he's talking to Biff. So the idea, I think, behind that scene was that because Terry had just mentioned that date, that was why Biff went to that date specifically. But that obviously was cut out of the movie. So I love the Doc Brown thing. He's like, that date must have some significance in the time-space continuum.
Right.
Or it's just a crazy coincidence.
But that was my theory, was that it was locked in somewhere in the memory banks of the dates that were selected. But yeah, it could be a number of things, and like you said, yeah, it could be that he locked in. But that makes it more difficult for him to actually program November 12th in there.
I mean, it is labeled, so it's possible that he just looked at the time circuits and was like, okay, present time, destination,
right?
That's where I want to go, okay, and that figured it out. And I'm assuming maybe he just, when he was flying, he just accelerated to 88 and happened to go back in time. I don't know. I don't know how he would know what he needed to do, but whatever. I can go with it. I can accept it. It's fun. It creates an alternate 1985. Right. Here's my other plot hole with that, actually. He drops off the almanac with Biff.
Uh-huh.
Therefore creating an alternate 1985.
Right.
However, he is able to return to the original 2015 to drop off the DeLorean. He should have, when he went back to 2015, he should have gone to the alternate 2015. The DeLorean should have really, never been returned, essentially. Actually, the 2015 around, as Doc explained it, the 2015 around Marty and Doc would have actually changed, right, before their eyes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That is true. Because, there's all kinds of things you could do because which line are they in? How many lines are there of time?
Well, in this movie, there's basically just two.
Right.
There's the original 1985, and then there's the alternate 1985.
Right.
I guess you could say there's three if you count the original 1985 from the first movie, where...
That's what I'm saying.
Like, Dave is late for work at Burger King, and... all that stuff.
No, I'm saying that in the original movie, I think they want you to go along with that when they go back to 1955 in Back to the Future Part 2.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the stuff that's happening in Back to the Future 1 is happening, that when you were watching Back to the Future, the original, all of that stuff from Back to the Future was happening.
All the stuff from Back to the Future 2 is happening in Back to the Future 1. We just don't see it.
Right.
Right.
But I think there's a plot hole to that, too, and I can't remember what it was. Anyway.
It can kind of bend your brain a little bit when you try to, when you really start thinking about it.
Right.
You're like, well, hang on. Because I was thinking about it earlier today, too, about how if Biff goes back in time and gives the almanac to younger Biff and then travels back to 2015, he should have traveled back to alternate 2015. And then if there was an alternate timeline, how did the almanac, does the almanac still exist? How does he, it's one of those things where he always has to go back in time to give the almanac. Otherwise, I don't know. It's very strange how that stuff.
Exactly. Here's the thing. If Biff had gone back and given him the almanac in Back to the Future 1, then when Marty went back to 1985, it should have been Biff's 1985.
Right.
because old Biff was there too.
Right.
But then again, Marty gets it and burns it in that timeline.
That's true.
So where does Biff actually get to take the almanac into the future is the question. When does Marty not burn the almanac?
Right, and that I don't know. Because I like the way you're thinking, because that is kind of how, like, the way you're thinking is, like, everything that they are trying to achieve technically has already been done. Right?
Exactly.
And so, with that mindset, then there is no alternate 1985, because it is impossible for an alternate 1985 to exist.
Right.
Whereas in this movie, I think you have to think that what happened in Back to the Future Part 1 happened by itself, and I'm like, I'll just call him Part 2 Marty, is not there climbing on the catwalk and stuff. That did not happen in the first go-around of 1955.
Right.
So, I mean, that's the only way it can be thought of in order for there to be an alternate 1985, because you're absolutely right. If Part 2 Marty was in the background of Back to the Future Part 1, and he was on the catwalk during Johnny Be Good and all that, then the almanac is always burned in that timeline, and there would never be a alternate 1985.
Exactly.
Right.
So yeah, you really have to look at Back to the Future 1 and 2. This is the first time this has ever happened in both those movies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's my plot hole since we're talking about them. Old Biff gets the almanac, brings it to young Biff.
Uh-huh.
Young Biff loses the almanac to Marty flying on a hoverboard.
Right.
He gets hit with manure again.
All right.
And grows up knowing that this guy had come back from the future, given him an almanac, and the second that Biff sees Marty in this second line, he's going to know this is when the almanac happens. All I have to do is follow them again, like I'm assuming the old guy that gave me the almanac did, get in the DeLorean, and then make sure that I really, really warn this young Biff, look, they're coming for this almanac today. Go hide in a basement.
Look, they
Don't
want this
go to
book.
the dance.
They're gonna burn it. Don't go to the dance. George McFly is gonna punch you in the face. Well, I think the easy explanation for that plot hole is that you're giving Biff too much credit.
Right.
He's not that smart. And number one, I don't think he knows that the old guy is from the future. He said he was a distant relative, remember?
Yeah, that's true. So, I guess, yeah,
He
he
just
doesn't
had some-
figure
he
out
just
that
had some-
Doc has a time machine until they
2015.
go to get Jennifer.
Right. So he lives his life for 60 years without knowing that time travel is possible. You'd think it would have all clicked, though. Like, in 2015, he'd have been like, oh.
This is the almanac I got.
Yeah. I do like how when they're chasing him around on the hoverboard scene, he comes out and he's like, something very familiar about all this. I do like that moment.
Yeah.
I don't normally like when sequels kind of just, like I said, I think we talked about this in another episode about, I don't like it when sequels reuse jokes.
Right.
And I also don't really care for it when sequels reuse, like, scenes, essentially. And that's basically what this movie does. That hoverboard scene is straight out of the first movie, the 1955 getting chased around by Biff scene. But it works. I think it's fun in this.
It works in this because you're literally going back and forward in time.
Right.
So I was going to mention, the scene of where they're back in the square, and you have Mr. Sandman playing, just like in the original movie. But granted, that was the same time period that it happened in, And in the future, yeah, you're right. They do the skateboarding thing, and that had not happened in 2015 before. But for some reason, to me, it works in this one.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really interesting is I have only seen this movie a handful of times as well. More than 3, which, like I said, I don't even know if I finished. I've probably seen this one 4 or 5 times. And I was never the biggest fan of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was fun, especially when I was young and a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked the second one because you got to go and see all the cool futuristic technology.
Yeah, exactly. The future was awesome when you were a kid. Yeah.
Right. And then I watched it not too long ago. In fact, it was after we did our Back to the Future podcast. And I was like, this is not as good as the first one. And it's almost kind of cheesy.
Mm-hmm.
But watching it this time, I surprisingly found myself enjoying it a lot more than I was expecting to.
Yeah.
And I didn't find it as cheesy as I thought I had remembered it like a year ago.
Right.
So,
I wonder why that is.
I don't know, but I enjoyed it a lot more this time.
I definitely agree that the first one's the best for sure. It's just it's so smart and it's funny and it's it's obviously one of my favorite movies. But I do really like the trilogy as a whole, and I really do enjoy this movie a lot. And I could see where you would think it was cheesy, especially now that we're in 2015, and there's all these jokes about, like, the justice system is so much quicker now that they've abolished all lawyers and things like that. Like, that type of stuff is obviously not,
right.
That's kind of cheesy. But
it is crazy. I don't know. I haven't been keeping up with it, but the fact that the Cubs are in the playoffs, are they still in the playoffs?
They are, but they've lost... I believe 3 out of the 7 games. So if they lose one more,
Gotcha.
They're out. Let me double check on that because it's actually they've lost. Yeah, because technically when this goes up tomorrow, it'll be Wednesday, and they should have lost by now, which they did. They just lost. Sorry.
Oh.
No. But I mean, they're not out of the series. Let me start over. They've lost 3 out of the 7 games. So if by some miracle they win the next 4, they will go to the World Series. But they've lost 3 in a row now, so I don't know. It doesn't look good. But how awesome would that be, though, if the Cubs go to the World Series and win, and Back to the Future Part 2 got it right?
Right. That's insane. Because when was the last time they won?
Oh, it's the last time they've been to the World Series. It's like something crazy, like 1908 or something like that. It's like been a long time.
Yeah.
Which is why they chose the Cubs in 1989. That's like they were like, what's the most ridiculous thing we could think of?
Right.
And that's why they chose the Cubs. And that's also they made up a team. I mean, we have a Miami team now, but back then there wasn't a Miami team, which is why it's like the Miami, like it looks like Miami Alligators or something.
Right. Which is pretty funny.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm a Dodgers fan, and when the Dodgers lost to the Mets, I started rooting for the Cubs. I was like, man, let's make Back to the Future 2 happen.
Mm-hmm.
And now the Cubs are losing, so that's kind of a bummer. But yeah. It's funny to see 1989's perception of what the future is going to be. And obviously they know this movie's a comedy, so I think there are some things they did for fun rather than like an actual prediction. But
sure, like wearing your pockets out. And...
Right. Yeah, the fashion in 2015 is wearing your clothes inside out and stuff.
Right. 2 ties.
2 ties, which I think would be awesome if we actually brought. And I also love Doc's like clear tie, like you can't even see it. I think that's pretty funny.
Oh, I never picked up on that.
Yeah, if you'll notice, he's wearing a transparent tie. So stuff like that I think is awesome. But they had no way of knowing that we were going to have the internet and that we were going to have cell phones. We were basically going to have, they had no idea that we were going to have little computers in our pockets.
Right.
So like there's a payphone in the movie. Newspapers are like, I mean, there's still newspapers around in 2015, but it's like newspapers are not where we get our like news from anymore, really. Exactly. It's our phones and everything. So
fax machines.
Fax machines, right. They did kind of get the video calling correct, though. I mean, like, you and I were using Skype right now. We don't have it necessarily through our TV.
Right.
But video calling is kind of, it's not used as much as they are making it seem like it's used in the movie. Like, it seems like it's the primary telephone usage. But
I
we
think
have
that
video
had a little
conferencing
help
now.
with Star Trek, though.
Well, probably. That could be.
And not only that, they had like a hanging flat screen TV.
Right, yeah.
Which back then was like, what? And I remember my dad and I talking like in the mid-90s about televisions and how they were going to probably, in the next 15 years be pictures, like picture
like real thin.
frames.
Picture, yeah. And
hanging on walls, and it was just incredible to think about. And so that's kind of cool that they got that right. And the size, it's pretty accurate to the size.
We don't watch 7 channels at a time.
No. And I like how they try to throw in channel 270 something as like a joke as to how many channels they have, yet we go like up to 999 now.
And the Weather Channel. That's the last one he said. He was like, channels 5, 7, 268, blah, 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 and the Weather Channel.
I think his voice is pretty annoying.
Marty McFly Jr.?
Yeah, but I can see how, he's trying to be younger, but he's kind of the same age as what he is, isn't he? Isn't he about 17?
Well, I was thinking about that too when I was watching it. When this movie takes place, they're like seniors in high school, Jennifer and Marty, so I would assume they're like 18.
Right, she's 47.
In 2015?
Right. And then what's the mother's name?
Jennifer?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean Leah Thompson?
Yeah.
Lorraine?
I hate her old lady voice.
Yeah, her old lady voice is a little cheesy.
It makes me cringe. But I loved George coming in with a pulled back, hanging upside down in a hovering device. That was pretty funny.
And part of the reason they did that was, Crispin Glover was not in this movie.
That was not Crispin Glover?
That's not Crispin Glover. He was, fired because he had a real problem with the end of the original Back to the Future. He thought that the original ending of Back to the Future promoted, happiness with wealth and fame and stuff like that. And so he was kind of, I don't know if he was arguing with producers or if he just publicly kind of denounced the movie or what. But he basically got himself in trouble with the production, and they decided they were not going to use him for part 2. And so that's another actor playing George McFly, and that's part of the reason why they have him upside down, because that way you don't recognize him. And you'll notice...
Yeah, I noticed when they go back to the past that they never show...
his face.
Right.
Yeah, he's always there's one time where you can kind of see his face, and it's the scene from the first movie where he's telling him, he's like, if you guys ever have a kid and he sets fire to the rug, go easy on him. That scene, but Biff comes up and talks to
it blurs him out.
part 2, Marty. Yeah. He's blurred out, but then he comes into focus for just a second, and you can see it's a guy with makeup. He's got prosthetics to make himself look like Crispin Glover.
Huh.
I can't remember the actor's name, but yeah, to be honest, he does a pretty good job of imitating Crispin Glover.
I did not even notice it was not Crispin Glover, so that's pretty good.
Yeah. Crispin Glover, though, sued Universal Studios, I believe, and won some money, and it also caused the Screen Actors Guild to come up with some new rules as to what's allowed in terms of using somebody's likeness and stuff, because that's basically what he was suing them for. He was like, I didn't give you permission to
make
use my likeness or whatever
where I was acting. Yeah,
right. So because I think they even use some of the there's one shot when he picks Lorraine off the ground after he punches Biff. There's a little bit of George in frame there, and I'm pretty sure that's from the first movie.
Yeah,
and so they even use some of his work, I guess you could say, in the part 2. So. Yeah, he sued him and he won for something. I don't remember how much money he made, but he He got money out of it. So yeah, that's not Crispin Glover. Crispin Glover is only in part 1.
Huh.
Apparently, there's a book out right now. I really want to get it. It's called We Don't Need Roads, and it's the making of the trilogy.
Uh-huh.
And I saw it at Barnes & Noble the other day, and I was flipping through it, and there was some photos of that dude in the Crispin Glover makeup. And the caption for it said, when Michael J. Fox first saw, I wish I could remember the actor's name, Jeffrey something or other, in makeup, he prophetically said, "Oh, Crispin ain't gonna like this."
Nice.
Yeah.
They did the makeup with Christopher Lloyd too.
They did, like, the old makeup?
Yeah, and then in order to keep from having to continuously have him in that,
they were like, I did a rejuvenation process thing, yeah.
Yeah, so, which I don't think he would have done, being the, standards and
correct
that he had.
It's out of character, I believe, for Doc Brown as well, but it was something they obviously were like, crap, we don't want to have him in old makeup for this whole movie.
Right.
So, yeah, they did that, which I remember as a kid that really confused me because I couldn't, honestly, his old makeup was something that never really stood out to me as a kid.
I agree.
And so when he was pulling off his face in part 2, I was like, what is he doing? Like, it never made sense to me until I got older and realized that they had, obviously 85 was 30 years later than 55 and so on. And so
right.
They had to give him... is Doc Brown dead in 2015?
That's a good question.
They never talk about that, but I'm assuming there's no...
That would be probably, because that would be 60... How old... Do you know how old he was in 55?
I don't, but he had the white hair already and everything, so...
Yeah, that's 60 years after.
He looks like he's at least in his 40s.
Mm-hmm. So he'd be
in
like
1955.
100. So yeah,
so he'd have been over 100. Yeah, so he's probably dead. That's crazy they never really talk about that, but yeah, Doc Brown is dead in 2015. Most likely.
Good thing he didn't run into his gravesite.
Which he does in part 3. Because he's... In 1885, he would be dead before 1985. So they find his grave in 1985. I'm sorry, 1955. He's living in 1885, and the movie part 3 starts off in 55 because Marty's still stuck in 55.
Right.
And they find his grave in 1955.
Yeah, that was the last moment that stood out to me where I was like, I really think that they're going to do a third one because it says to be continued.
Did yours say to be continued? Because the one I watched said to be concluded.
I didn't look that much.
Oh, come on, man. You're not paying attention. We got a podcast.
I saw to be CON, and I just stopped there.
You're like, yeah, I get it. I think the DVD for I don't know, I'd have to pop it in and check, but I think the DVD for the first movie says to be continued, which it didn't say that in the theatrical version.
Right.
And then this one says to be concluded. I know the one I watched today said to be concluded, and then it went into that part 3 trailer.
Right.
Or teaser, or whatever you want to call it.
So what do you think about the world that Biff created?
Well, that's, this... It's funny that we were saying that this sequel is cheesier than the first movie, which it is, but it's also darker, like in these scenes. In the alternate 1985, it's a much darker kind of film. There's a drive-by shooting that happens. Right. They talk about the school being burnt down. It's obviously not a great world to live in, having Biff basically running the town.
It's very eerie.
It is very eerie.
To see all this museum and videos talking about how great this guy is that you know he's not.
The Biff Tannen Memorial.
Right.
Museum or whatever, yeah.
And how much power he has, and you just kind of see where that corruption has taken everything.
Yeah. It's definitely not a hill valley I would want to live in.
I agree with that.
Although, one of my favorite moments, and I'm glad they put it in the movie, one of my favorite moments is when he bumps into the homeless guy from part 1. Because in part 1 he's like crazy drunk drivers,
right?
And in this one he goes crazy drunk pedestrians, and he knows his name. He's like Red,
right? I like how he looks at him like, how do you know me?
Yeah, I think, what? I really wish we could see what alternate 85 Marty McFly looks like. You know?
Yeah, good point.
Like, he's in Switzerland, obviously, at some boarding school or something. But I really want to know, like, what he looks like. What is his style?
Right. Is he as confident?
Right.
Is he a good guy? No,
There's a whole
I
movie
think
right there.
Biff makes some reference to him always having some kind of characteristic. I don't remember what it was, though. Probably.
Always because when he's standing up for his mom, he says something like that. Yeah, like always the tough guy or something.
Right.
I can't remember. Speaking of that, why do you... I think the reason one of the things I don't like about this movie is that they decided to throw in this weird character trait for Marty that he cannot let it go when somebody calls him a chicken.
Right.
Because that doesn't happen in the first movie.
It does.
Somebody calls him a chicken in the first movie?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I'm not so sure.
Yeah, that's where he gets it from. It's from the first movie.
I could be wrong, but I think it's something they introduced in this film.
I am pretty sure, man. You're going to want to look this one up because I'm telling you.
I will look it up while we talk about it, but it's used like 3 times in this film. And the first time it's funny. It's when he's fighting Griff. Because he's like, nobody calls me. And then he pulls out the bat and he's like, chicken. You know, and he kind of is like, ha.
Uh-huh.
But then it happens again in 1955. And it also happens again in, I guess it happens first in alternate 1985. And then it happens again in 1955. I'm pretty sure.
Right. No, man,
So
that happened at least, I'm pretty sure, a couple times in the original movie.
All right. So anyway, that's something that I think is a little overused in this film, is the chicken thing. And I think the only reason they really do it is so that, like, you know, if he hadn't been called chicken in 1955, he wouldn't have gotten hit by the door by part 1 Marty McFly, and then Biff wouldn't have gotten the book back and stuff like that. So it just kind of, you know, kept Marty from achieving his goal. But, like I said, it's almost overused. They do it 3 times in this movie. Speaking of alternate 85 Biff, when they're on the roof and Biff is about to shoot Marty, and Marty jumps off the building, that is a bold move. Because even though the DeLorean is there, he could slip off the DeLorean and die.
And I like how he just flies up with his arms crossed, like, haha, look at me. While Biff is still standing in front of him with a gun that he has not fired.
I didn't even think about that, but what if it had, like, scared Biff? He'd been like, ah! And just, like, shot Marty McFly. Oh, that'd be terrible. That'd be the end of the movie.
Yeah. Would have been this.
Doc Brown would have had to go back and get the almanac.
That's true. And that still would not have saved Marty.
Because he wasn't the alternate 85 Marty.
Right.
So would there... Yeah, so...
We don't want to go into this again. We don't want to go into this. We'll spend 10 minutes.
We don't have to get in, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. But,
anyway...
Let's talk about the ending of the movie. You know, with, they finally get the almanac. They burn it.
Which I really liked the story. I thought it was a cool story.
About the almanac?
Yeah, even when I was starting to watch this again, and I was thinking, you know, I know I'm not going to like this movie that much. Like, it's okay, but even while I was watching and I was like thinking about what the story was, I was like, this is still a pretty creative story. That, someone had some inside information, basically took it back to themselves in the past. Told him, hey, make some money with this. And it changes the future to where they're rich and powerful and evil.
Evil, yeah.
So the story was cool. I liked that whole deal.
I like it too. It makes sense, you know.
And to intertwine it with the first movie and what's happening in the 1955 scenario was really cool.
Yeah, I love that. And I've always loved that stuff. Like, as a kid, like, seeing Michael J. Fox or Marty McFly, you know, crawling on that catwalk above himself playing guitar, like, that just, I thought was just one of the coolest looking scenes that I had seen as a kid, especially. And, like, now you can kind of see the effects work a little bit. It's not as I mean, it's not, it's a little bit, it's noticeable and everything. Mm-hmm. But it still looks cool, in my opinion, when you see, what I really like about it is how we get, like, different angles from the first movie. It's like we're seeing the same stuff, but from a different point of view.
Right, you see, what's his name, going to the phone.
Yeah. Marvin Berry.
Yeah, Marvin Berry going to the phone. You see him going and making the phone call while Marty's going up the ladder.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I like when Marty he sees himself playing guitar on stage, and so we're getting like it's that same shot pretty much, because I think right after he goes up the ladder, Marvin comes around the corner.
Right.
But he sees himself from like off the side of the stage playing guitar and stuff. Yeah, it's cool, and I love seeing those scenes. And he's like looking in and he sees Marty talking to Lorraine and George.
Right.
Like as he's leaving the dance,
Right.
Like seeing that from another angle and everything. I just, those scenes with the two Martys and everything, I think it's awesome. I'm really glad they did that. And I think it was really, like you said, I think it was really kind of cool / smart of them to go back to 1955 in this film and have two Martys and,
Exactly.
And seeing it from another angle like that.
And
that we got to see what Biff was doing before he showed up at the car with Lorraine and stuff,
Right, getting yelled at by his grandmother.
Right, yeah. And, getting kind of,
What did you say?
Well, he was reading the Ooh La La magazine,
right,
and then
right.
Strickland starts talking to him. I love his response. He's like, "Is that liquor I smell?" And he goes, "I wouldn't know. I don't know what liquor smells like because I'm too young to drink." he's just...
Actually, he was not reading the Ooh La La magazine. He had the Ooh La La magazine in his pocket with the cover over it. No, I'm wrong. Because he took it. Because Strickland took it. That's right.
Strickland took it and it had Ooh La La.
It did, and that's why I found that, and that's why that line is so funny, where he's like, interesting material, sports material.
Yeah.
But when later you find out he was talking about ladies.
I also like that Strickland, is like, "Is that liquor I smell?" And then he goes back to his office and puts liquor in his coffee.
Right. And that's a cool shot too, is after he leaves, and you're talking about perspective, you get to see Marty look out and see the famous scene where George is
has
getting
no idea
his
where
arm
Biff is. Yeah.
Twisted, and I really liked all that stuff. I thought they did a really good job.
I agree. Like you said, it's not, and I think part of the, we're talking about the cheese factor. I think part of that is having Michael J. Fox playing his. It was necessary for him to play his son because they had to look alike in order for him to, step in for his son. But then you got that scene where Michael J. Fox is playing Marty McFly Jr. and the daughter. Like, that is kind of like, his pre-Nutty Professor kind of, goofiness, where, like, it's the same actor playing all the members of the family.
Right. Yeah, it seems to me that the cheesier moments were...
in the future.
The future and the alternate 85.
Right.
But it wasn't... And I think that some of that could have just been the makeup of Biff.
Right.
To make him look older.
And Lorraine's makeup.
Yeah.
Kind of ridiculous. But it makes sense at the same time.
But, it didn't bother me, like I said, as much this time. I was more accepting of it. And I enjoyed the movie.
I think it's just such a fun movie that you could kind of overlook those things.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite scenes, talking about having Marty being able to go across the catwalk while he's playing the song, is also when Doc Brown is having the conversation with himself while he's fixing the wiring.
Yes, that is great.
Yeah. Now, granted, it's kind of obvious that they have him not looking over, because he clearly would have looked over and seen himself.
Yes.
Too many times he should have.
Yes.
Especially if this guy is trying to hide behind this pole.
He's like walking backwards,
Right.
yeah, and like hands him the thing without
Right,
looking at him.
right. But it was still
It's
a
still
really
fun,
cool
though.
scene.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Something just came to my brain about how you were talking about how you were like watching it. You're like, I think they're kind of setting up part 3. One of the other things they set up in part 3 is the accident. They're talking about the accident that Marty. I keep wanting to mix up the actor and the character name. The accident that Marty has that messes up his hand, and he has to quit playing music and get a real job, which is why he's like become a loser in the future. That accident happens in part 3, or actually doesn't happen in part 3. Spoiler alert for part 3. But they talk about it in part 2, and then we actually see it in part 3. We see a young Needles, and Needles is the reason that it happens.
Okay.
So that's another thing they were setting up some stuff for part 3, as they kind of peppered in some stuff for part 3 throughout part 2.
Interesting. Yeah, see, I don't remember that at all. So when I watch part 3, it will be like seeing it
For the first time.
pretty much for the first time. So I remember some guy with a mustache and a gun and being really angry, and which is Biff's ancestor.
I think it takes place in the Old West.
Either
You remember Mary
either that or a
Steenburgen?
movie set. But and I remember, unless this was in the preview, but I remember something with him like getting dragged along the ground.
Yeah. That is basically, and that was in the preview, that's basically the skateboarding scene of part 3, if I recall correctly.
I remember something really goofy happening in the first 15 minutes, where he was being chased.
Oh, well, in the very beginning of, I don't want to talk about part 3 too much because we'll have an episode
Right.
on part 3, but in the very beginning of part 3, Doc takes him to a drive-in, and he drives towards the screen, and right as he hits 88 miles per hour, he...
That's right. Is in a Western. Or it looks like he went into a Western because they were watching
yeah,
a
like
Western.
the bottom of the screen has a bunch of like Native Americans, like on horses and stuff. And he's like, well, if I'm going right here, won't I run into a bunch of Indians? And he's like, no, he's like, that's a painting. He's like, there's not going to be any Indians around. And then as soon as he gets back in 1885, there's like a bunch of Indians running at him. And he's like, oh, and he has to reverse his DeLorean, and he like hides in some cave or something.
Seems like I remember something about knocking down a fence or... Anyway.
Oh, that happens too. Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen part 3 as well, but he falls down a hill, hits his head on a fence, and he wakes up in the McFly household of the 1880s. And so that's where Lorraine is, I believe. And then, of course, Michael J. Fox plays his long-lost relative, Seamus McFly.
See, I remembered having an uneasy feeling about that area, and that what you're explaining to me kind of makes sense now. Why I would have felt that. We'll see.
They do that whole thing which they did in this movie. She's like, which they did in the first movie, where he's like, it's dark and he's waking up and he's like, I had a horrible nightmare. She's like, well, you're safe back here on the 27th floor, and he's like, 27th floor.
Right.
And I can't remember what she says in the third one, but it's something like, you're back here in good old 1885, or maybe says like the McFly Ranch or something like that. I don't remember. But he wakes up and realizes he's in the Old West again. Yeah. So, just repeats of those scenes. Like I said, I don't normally like, but for this trilogy, it's nostalgic, I guess. So I can.
Sure, you grew up with 3,
All 3
like
of
you
them.
said. So, all 3, but even more.
The 3 a bunch. Yeah, I watched 3 a bunch
Right.
as a kid.
Right. So, anything else that you can think of about part 2?
Nothing I can think of off the top of my head. Did you see the trailer for Jaws 19 that Universal Studios put out? That was pretty great.
Yeah.
I'll put a link to that in the on the website in case anybody else wants to see that. But no, yeah, I think we've pretty much covered everything I wanted to talk about.
I agree. I can't think of anything else.
Well, let's talk about ratings.
Okay.
What would you give Back to the Future Part 2?
When I was starting it, I was, like I said, I had seen it just a year ago, and I was expecting to give it 3 out of 4 or 3 out of 5 stars.
Uh-huh.
I think I'm actually going to give it 4 out of 5, just because the second half of the movie really impressed me.
Yeah.
And it's still fun to watch the future stuff.
Absolutely.
But it's not, it's more like a guilty pleasure.
Right.
And the second half is actually where you're like, this is actually fun and enjoyable.
Absolutely. And that's where I'm torn, because that's kind of how I feel about it too. It's like the future stuff is a little cheesy, like we were talking about, and so it is kind of like a guilty pleasure. So I want to give this movie like an A-, but I feel like that's super high. So I'm leaning towards a B+, which is still high, but and I think it's just purely for nostalgic reasons. It's a really fun movie to watch. I can pretty much watch this movie anytime and enjoy it. So yeah, I'm gonna B+, I guess, is what I'm gonna go with.
Okay.
Curious to see what my grade for part 3 is, so we'll see.
Me too, and I'm curious what I'm going to give it.
Well, we'd love to know what you think about Back to the Future Part 2. Thanks for listening. I hope you are listening to it on October 21st, 2015. If not, that's okay. But you can leave us a comment on cinemaheroes.com, or you can throw us a line on Twitter at cinemaheroes, or go to our Facebook, facebook.com/SM and SM podcast.
If you're not listening to it on the 21st, just hop in your DeLorean and head back a few days.
That's right. No problem. Just don't pick up any sports almanacs for those couple of days, I guess. Anyway, that's all we have for this episode. I'm Justin Speck.
I'm John Pelzo.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for downloading.